goes on forever, but finally got it. So I wanted to go ahead and call to order our meeting minutes from September. Do we have an approval?
Do we have
Point of order. Point of order.
I don't know if we have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, I didn't know if we had one.
There's no quorum yet. I don't know if we're going to establish a quorum. Hopefully we will. Do we know?
I think the weather has deterred some folks.
Weather has deterred some folks. Okay.
Madam Director.
Pardon me.
Point of order. My name is not spelled right in the minutes.
Okay, thank you. We will fix that.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds like we don't have a quorum, so we will move those to our January meeting.
I believe it just says approval of minutes on the agenda, but I think we had held off on approving the July minutes as well last time because I raised some concerns and I haven't finished reviewing them. So anyway, we can certainly move on, but at some point we will have at least 2 sets of minutes. And if there's no quorum today, then probably a 3rd set of minutes to review in January.
Okay. All right.
How much do we need for quorum?
We need 7 voting members for quorum.
And do we determine?
I am a voting member, but none of the elected officials on the board are voting members.
So only one person at the table is a voting member.
Correct.
Okay.
We have folks online that are.
How many do we have online?
How many, Aaron?
3 more online.
So we have 4 total.
So we would need 3 more voting members in order to approve minutes.
Yes.
Take official action.
I didn't realize that there were folks that are on the board that are not voting members. Sorry. 'Cause we do have it with those.
Okay, do we want to move forward then with our discussion?
Yep.
Okay, well, we will go ahead and do the 2024 annual choice report with Miss Erin.
Yes, good afternoon. I am Erin Wright. I am the Director of Access and Engagement with the Division of Aging, and I'm here today to talk about the state fiscal year 2024 choice annual report. It was sent to the board members last month. I will review it in detail, following along with the requirements of the report that are outlined in the Indiana Code, and then we'll have some additional discussion of waiting lists and year-end spending. So after we review it today, the board may comment on the report, solicit public comments and testimony on the report, or also incorporate their own ideas into the report. I will briefly review the requirements of the report that are listed on this next slide and the one following. The report covers, and there's a lot of words on these screens, but the report covers the amount and source of all local, state, and federal funds spent on home and community-based services, the number and types of participating providers, things like demographics, functional limitation data, cost comparison, comparing the choice program and other publicly funded long-term care programs, including a little bit about nursing facility costs. There's some information on client care outcomes and a determination of estimated number of applicants for services based on their functional needs. So Choice is a program that funds an array of home and community-based services and serves as the funding of last resort for individuals needing support in their home. Next slide. Choice serves older adults age 60 and over, and also individuals of any age with a disability. So there is a cost share for anyone above 150% of the federal poverty level, and on a sliding fee scale at 350% of the federal poverty level, the cost share equals 100%. So for some context, the federal poverty level annual income for a single person household is $15,060, and a two-person household is $20,440. There are also asset limitations within the choice program. Individuals may not have more than $250,000 in assets, and there is a sliding cost share for any assets over $20,000. Next. So the choice program is administered through Indiana's network of area agencies on aging through grants awarded by the FSSA Division of Aging. And this is a map of all of the planning and service areas in Indiana and a listing of our 15 area agencies serving the 16 areas. Next slide. So this is a table summarizing Medicaid waiver spending and our non-Medicaid Division of Aging grant funds for long-term services and supports. And as you can see, the dollars for the Medicaid waiver, home and community-based services far exceed grant funding available for our grant-funded HCBS, although the grant funds really fill a critical role and actually impact a larger number of individuals than the waivers do. So on the next slide is a breakdown of the annual appropriation for choice in state fiscal year 24. So we are awarded through the budget bill over $48 million in the total choice appropriation. $12.5 million of that is transferred to Medicaid, the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning, right away to match federal dollars for the Medicaid waiver. And this state fiscal year 24 was the first year of a lower number of that transfer, thanks to House Enrolled Act 1001, which was the budget bill effective July 1st, 2023, that reduced that transfer from 18 million down to 12.5 million. So, and the state administration line includes about 2.1 million in choice funding that was paid to Medicaid for CAMS related and other expenses. And CAMS is our care management system that is used for service planning for the waiver prior to July, and still for the under 60 population, and all of our non-Medicaid home and community-based services for reporting, service planning, invoicing, et cetera. The next slide begins the slides that will outline the demographic characteristics of the individuals served in state fiscal year 2024. And I didn't mention it, but just so everyone's clear, state fiscal year 2024 started July 1, 2023 and ended June 30th, 2024. So the AAAs through the choice program primarily serve individuals who are in the 60 to 84 age range, with about 36% of the individuals served being 60 to 74, and then an additional 26% were in that 75 to 84 range. About 20% are 85 and older, and about 19% were under 60, with less than 2% being children 18 and under. These are consistent with age ranges in the past, but we did have a very slight increase in the number of under 60 folks served. In total, last year, there were 5,631 individuals served through choice, which was a slight decline from the prior year, but we'll talk more about that later. So a little more about the demographics. Last year, 77% of the individuals served live alone. Most are female, which is 68%. 76% were white, 18% African American, 4% Asian, and 2% identified as Hispanic. There was a slight increase in the minority population compared to the prior year, particularly among the Asian population. And for some comparison purposes, according to the 2020 census, 77% of Hoosiers are white, 11% are African American, and 2.5% Asian. So looking at our data, this shows that we are effectively targeting some of these minority groups by serving a higher percentage than in the general population. And feel free to stop me at any time if there are any questions. All right, next, talk a little bit about the diagnoses of individuals served through choice. This information is collected through the, yes.
Thank you. I will stop you. You were talking about ethnicity.
Mhm.
I think it's on page 7 of the draft report. You have ethnicity of clients.
Yes,
And I think those are percentages.
those are counts of
Oh,
people.
those are counts.
Yes,
Okay.
Yep.
So. Okay,
so of the people, the way that the data is collected, the individuals say, yes, I'm Hispanic, no, I'm not Hispanic. So they could say that they're white and Hispanic, African American and Hispanic. So this is the breakdown of how they answered the race question. And then on top of that, they said, yes, I'm Hispanic. And these are only the yeses.
okay, I see. And so in the previous graph with race of clients, you had 68 white, Hispanic, Latino. So that's why you have 68 white under ethnicity.
Correct.
But then you have 70 unknown. So those are,
Those are people who indicated that they are Hispanic, but we don't know what their race answer was because they didn't provide one.
okay, all right. Sorry, I thought those were
Okay.
percentages.
Okay.
I was confused. Thank you.
And I can work if needed to try to clarify that. Okay, next slide. With the diagnoses, these are collected through the assessment process when an individual is exploring eligibility with the choice program. And there's a very, very, very long list of possible diagnoses. So we had categorized them based on ICD-10 codes. And I just included primary diagnoses on the slides, but there's some additional information in the report. About 15% of choice participants' primary diagnosis is some type of circulatory or vascular issue, not including dementia. About 4.7% of choice participants have a primary diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. About 5.5% have a primary diagnosis of a neurological disorder. And then there's this big bucket of other, which didn't fall into any of those three categories, but the numbers were too small to kind of group them together. And about 6% of people, we were missing any diagnosis information. This is also kind of trending with what we've seen in past years, though we did have a slight decrease in the all others category compared to last year and had a comparable increase in the circulatory and vascular category. So this information is useful when we're thinking about programming or what kind of supports might be helpful for targeting this population. All right, next slide. So here's where we start to get into the comparisons of costs of the choice program compared to institutional or skilled nursing facility care. These costs include individuals who are receiving care management only. They might be receiving care management plus other in-home services like attendant care, home delivered meals, adult day services, as well as the choice administrative dollars that are used to administer the program. And we have it broken out by total state and federal costs. And based on an average of about 2,500 individuals served per month with an average utilization length time about of about 5.3 months. The average cost for the choice program is $5,203 per month compared to a year-long stay in a nursing facility of $82,000.
Per year. 5,203 per year.
Oh, did I say per month? Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Where are the choice facilities located at? Or are they at home and they're getting the services at home?
They're getting the services at home.
At home.
So we issue grants to the network of area agencies on aging, and then they work with a network of local service providers to provide the in-home services. And we'll go in a couple slides into talking a little bit about the array of services that are provided, but it's all in-home or community-based services.
May I
No
ask one
facility.
follow-up question? If the home does not seem conducive of good standard living conditions, do you partner and offer recommended services to get it up to standard?
So, if an individual is being served through the choice program, they do have a care manager that they work with that can go in the home and connect them to other services. There are also services through choice that can support minor home repairs, home modifications, if say they need a ramp or grab bars or bathroom door widened so somebody can more easily access that. Those kind of services can be funded through choice as well.
Thank you.
I want to pause when we get to slide number or page number 11, whichever slide corresponds to that in your slide deck. Are we there?
Let me get open page 11 to see.
It's right there.
Okay, that's one's coming, I think, the next slide after this one.
9, 10, and 11 all kind of go together.
Yes, they do.
When
Yeah,
we get
but-
to when we get to 11, let me ask a couple questions.
Okay. Okay, talking a little bit more about participant outcomes. I already mentioned 5,631 individuals were served in 2024, state fiscal year 2024. And the average number served per month was about 2,500. We had 68 individuals that transitioned from choice to the aged and disabled waiver. And actually no one last year moved to the traumatic brain injury waiver. So this is a little over half of the number that transitioned to one of the waivers in 2023. And this may be a reflection, at least in part, of the introduction of the waiting list for the aged and disabled waiver this past April. The number of people who received choice services while Medicaid eligible was about 60% of the total that were served. I do want to point out that just because they have Medicaid, it does not mean that they are eligible for the waiver. They may have a type of Medicaid that is not eligible for the waiver, or they may not meet the level of care requirement for the waiver. All right, this next table looks at the activities of daily living or functional limitations for individuals served through the choice program. And it's things like bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, and walking. About 60% of those served through choice have 3 or more ADLs. About 16%-ish fall into the 0 to 1 ADL category. So that group that we're trying to target for earlier intervention. And if we look at the number of individuals that only received care management, that number for that group was closer to 20%. And care management only also includes the options counseling service, which we report as part of care management. So this may be a reflection of options counseling, possibly providing resource connections outside of enrolling them in the choice program or another program for services. All right, next. There were about 1,400 choice providers in the current state network over last year. And in many instances, they're providing services that are similar to those provided on the aged and disabled waiver. The AAAs are responsible for entering into the agreements with the providers and contracting with them, and also providing the payments to the providers through their available grant funds. At a minimum, though, if a service is provided on the waiver, the provider must be waiver certified so that they've gone through an application and kind of have that at least minimum quality threshold and oversight threshold. This is the slide that's getting into the array of services that are available to choice participants. This isn't on the slide, but last year in state fiscal year 24, the most resources that were directed to any one service was attendant care, which provides that direct in-home support with things like bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, those activities of daily living. About 37% of the total grant funds supported attendant care. The next largest category was care management, including options counseling. About 25% of the funds went to that. And then next up was home and community assistant, or formerly we referred to it as homemaker services. So can help with cleaning, cooking, those types of activities. Okay. So I think this next one, Representative Clear, is the one that you wanted to talk about. But this slide looks at Choice's estimated effect on funding, program savings, participant care outcomes. So the average cost per day for Choice services, and this number is calculated differently than the one I talked about prior. This is only looking at individuals that have a Choice service plan, so that are directly getting those in-home services, not the ones that just got the care management and options counseling. That cost was estimated to be $189 lower than the average cost to support someone in a skilled nursing facility. So $40 for Choice versus $229 in a facility. And that's a daily rate cost. So per month, it was $6,872 for a skilled facility and about $1,200 per month for Choice. And just for comparison purposes, the aged and disabled waiver averaged $4,428 per month last year, and the TBI waiver, traumatic brain injury, was about $6,400. So, and I do want to point out that these savings are not necessarily savings that are realized, because the eligibility criteria for living in a skilled nursing facility or being on the waiver are different than Choice. So all of the participants served through Choice would not be necessarily eligible for the waiver, or they might not have Medicaid.
My turn?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So not everything I wanted to talk about is on page 11 of the draft report, but I thought it would be a good place to pause.
Okay.
So 9, 10, and 11 are the pages that I'm going to be referring to. So first of all, though, Aaron is right. I want to commend you once again on what an outstanding job you continue to do on this report. How many years have you been doing it now?
I think I counted this as my 7th.
Okay, well, every year you have made meaningful improvements to the report, and I know I speak for a lot of people in expressing gratitude for that.
Thank you.
You have really turned this report into something that not only reflects the raw data of the Choice program, but also speaks to the value of the Choice program, which I think is more critical than ever in the context of the changes that have occurred over the last year. And the changes that are ongoing. So anyway, so first of all, thank you for
Thank you.
doing such an outstanding job with this. So let's jump back to the previous page of the draft report, page 10, where you talked about the ADLs, and you just referred to that in terms of, you didn't use this term, but apples to apples comparison of choice to waiver and skilled nursing care. I love seeing those numbers in the 0 ADL category and the 1 ADL category because that reflects in part the work that this body, the Choice Board, has done in the past to open up choice to Hoosiers who would not have been able to access choice. And I think it's fair to say that everyone who is represented by those 0 and 1 ADL columns has received some level of preventive services to keep them from having additional ADL impairment. Would you agree?
Mhm.
So I guess the thing I don't like is those numbers should be a lot higher, in my opinion. We should have multiples of each of those numbers in the 0 and 1 ADL category. One thing we've talked about in the past is with your, I say new software. How many years are you now into the new software?
5.5.
5.5 years. So, I mean, we've talked about this a couple times in recent years that our ability to do longitudinal tracking of outcomes is improving the longer we're in that software. So at what point will you be able to start speaking to long-term outcomes of folks who start receiving choice services with 0 or 1 ADLs?
So last year about this time is when we did that targeted study looking at 0 to 1, and it did include sort of a matrix of if they were at this 0 ADLs this year and it followed them for a period of time. We have not yet updated them, and we have not yet built in that kind of reporting in CAMS as we've been working, and we've had presentations on it about the choice dashboard. That project is still progressing, and there are plans to have more real-time data on that as that continues to be built. So we've not lost sight of it.
Yeah. So ultimately, you think it'll be part of the choice dashboard, or at least
It's
part
on
of-
the list.
Yeah,
So,
or at least
yes.
part of the annual report,
The plan is it's going to be on the dashboard.
Yeah. which then it would
we
obviously
can
become
put-
part of
yes.
the annual report
Mhm.
easily.
Yeah, so, and the dashboard, the thing that's great about the dashboard, while it's not a year-long summary, it gives us the ability to really drill down by part of the state, demographic information, ADL information, even diagnoses. So it's, I think when we get there and it's readily used, I think it'll provide really powerful information.
What is the status of the dashboard development?
So, I actually think we have a meeting about it tomorrow. Work on it stalled a little bit just as there were other competing priorities with all of the transitions happening.
Yeah.
So, and I know one of the things that we were looking at in follow up to when we presented on it, or when Carissa presented on it, maybe over the summer or in the spring, we were trying to figure out how to give access, at least for testing purposes, to you and other board members who may be interested. And we're trying to sort through some privacy and HIPAA requirements related to that. So I don't have an exact date of when we'll be able to share. It might have even been May.
I think it was May.
I've lost all
If I
track.
remember correctly. But, yeah, I've been eager to be able to
Yes.
take it for a test drive, but you
Yeah.
don't think we're quite there yet?
Not yet, but
But
and I can try and get an update of them more and then share it when I send out the minutes,
maybe,
or not the minutes,
maybe before the end of the year,
I'm gonna guess probably not.
maybe before January 8th. When the legislative session starts.
I don't know about that
Okay.
either.
Well, I mean,
I know, I understand.
I'm kidding with you, but I think
Right.
it is a very important
Mhm.
tool.
Right.
And, your report is going to
Mhm.
be, important information for the
Mhm.
legislature for the upcoming session, but it sure would be nice to,
Mhm.
to, at least for, legislators and others who
Mhm.
are willing to test drive the dashboard to be able to have access to that before we get too far into the
Mhm.
legislative discussion about choice and waiver and all the other
Mhm.
things, Medicaid. So.
And I can check too, even if it's not accessible for more usage, if there's specific data that we can pull out of it that's not included in here to kind of drill down on some of those, that
Sure.
might be at least something that's
Yeah,
feasible in the shorter term.
but what I'm getting at, I think, you're, I know, tracking with me that
Mhm.
at the point that CAMs can provide longitudinal data
Mhm.
regarding outcomes for people who start receiving choice services with 0 or 1 ADLs, I think it will help make the case for the choice program and the role that it already plays in prevention and quality of life,
Mhm.
and the greater role that it could play.
Yes, makes sense.
Let's see, back up to. So, oh, yeah, still on page 10. So you started using care management instead of case management?
Yes, that change occurred, and sometimes I slip up and use them interchangeably, but
Yeah.
I want to say it's maybe pre-cams. It's been several years.
Maybe I'm just more sensitive to it because of
Mhm.
all the terminology confusion we've had with the MLTSS transition, talking about, we talked about case management, case coordination,
Mhm.
care coordination, service coordination. So,
Yes, this was
prior.
way prior.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that's been a term that
Yes.
we've used here.
Mhm.
And then I would say importantly, if we look at page 11 of the draft report, I appreciate that you have broken out under the table for further comparison, the Medicaid waiver cost per enrollee per month in state fiscal year 2024 were as follows. And then you have the old A&D waiver at 4428 and the TBI waiver at 6412. Remind me why you don't tabulate those, why you don't include them in the tables for comparison on pages 9 and 11. In other words,
I don't know that there's a good reason for that, other than this was added, I think, in response to one of these conversations in prior years. And
It
I just
was.
plugged it in.
yeah.
So I can move it and do the same calculation.
Well, I'm just suggesting
Mhm.
that I think it is valuable information, and rather than being more of a footnote, the way you
Okay.
presented it, I think if it's not too much trouble to update this year's report, you could go ahead and include it in tabular
Okay, yes,
form.
that should be
'Cause
manageable.
I did the math, and let's see, I divided cost per month for A and D was 44.28 divided by 30, I think is 148 a day.
Okay.
And if you break that down into what, about 66.44 FMAP and state funds, then you're at
55.
about 98 and 50. So one other thing I would like you to consider is maybe some narrative that will make sure people are thinking of this, people reading the report are thinking of this in terms of apples to apples. Because I think some people might look at that if you put it in tabular form, which again, I think would be useful. But they may look at it and say, well, the daily cost to the state of choice is $40. And the daily cost to the state of Medicaid waiver is $50 using my math. And that takes us back to the longstanding debate of use of state dollars. So it would look in that simple calculation as though well, let's see, the FMAP, yeah, it would still be, choice would still be $10 under on a daily basis. Does that make sense? If my math is right?
Yes.
So we'd be at 229 for nursing facility, 50 for the state share of A&D, and then 40 for choice. Sorry to
For
put
the
you on
state.
spot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I need a calculator.
Yeah, I'm taking, well, I'll check my math here.
All
Somebody
right.
check
So
my math. I
44,
put
28 divided by 30.
Yeah, I took 30 as a average month,
Mhm.
and that's $147.60. And if I take, let's say, well, I'm sorry, I said, what did I say earlier? 66 and 44, be 66 and 34, I'm sorry. So,
Yep,
34% would be $50.18 a day.
Mhm.
So does my math seem sound?
Yes.
Okay, so we'd be 229 for nursing facility in terms of state cost. We would be 50 for A&D and then 40 for choice. But what I was going to suggest that you might include in a narrative is that that understates the state's cost, because that's only the A&D waiver cost. It's not recognizing that they become eligible for all Medicaid services once they become waiver eligible, correct?
Yes.
So the state's cost would be probably indeterminate, but logically higher than just the A&D share.
Yes.
And that's why I'm
I
asking
might
you.
have some data on that
Okay.
too. I'll have to check, and I don't know if it
That's
would
what I'm
be
asking you to
better, but
narrate,
yeah.
is to make sure that anyone reading the report understands
Mhm.
that it's not an appropriate apples to apples comparison to say that the A&D waiver cost was the total cost to the state, because one of the benefits, I think most of us would argue for choice, is that choice in many cases forestalls the individual's application for Medicaid,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, that makes sense.
we have both, anecdotal and certainly empirical evidence that people who start receiving choice services in at least some cases forestall
Mhm. Yeah.
Medicaid eligibility.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so you're tracking with
I
me
am,
in
yes.
terms
So
of,
I'll work on it.
belabor the point, but the narrative I think is really
Mhm.
important. And then I guess the elephant in the room is this is looking back at fiscal 24
Correct.
for A&D. How are you going to do the comparison for fiscal 25 with the two new waivers and the capitated rates in MLTSS?
I don't have a specific answer for that yet, but I actually have started thinking about.
Well, and again, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think it's important,
Yes.
not only that you're thinking about it, but that the choice
Mhm.
board members and other stakeholders here in the room and watching online start thinking about that as well and be in conversation with you and Ms. Huckleberry and others as appropriate.
Yes. Yep.
Because
Thank you for that.
You know, just when you got the report almost perfect and so meaningful. Seriously, I mean, now I feel like we're almost starting over.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay.
that was pretty much everything I had for 9, 10, and 11. So thanks for the time.
I guess, does anyone want to add anything about this topic? I have a few more slides. But just related to the costs and the conversation we've just had. Anyone online or anybody else? Okay. So Rebecca, next slide, please. Okay. So this slide's just a high-level summary. We saw about a 9.3% decrease in the overall clients served compared to state fiscal year 23. Most of this decrease was in the number of individuals receiving care management only services. And think that is at least due in part due to better, more accurate documentation in the system, but also just allocation of resources. The number of individuals receiving the care management plus the service planned in-home services remained relatively steady. There was a slight, I think, 2% decrease. Overall, we still have not yet returned to pre-pandemic numbers of individuals served. We did see in 24 compared to 23, an increase in the length of time that people were utilizing services. It went from an average of 6.7 months up to 7.1 month. Again, shows that people were staying on the program longer. Part of this may be also due to the implementation of the waiting list in April, but that was just the last quarter of the state fiscal year. So I think there are some other factors in play there as well. Okay, this slide that's up talks about choice costs, kind of breaking out for participants receiving that care management only and those receiving additional services. The care management only costs are just estimation based on months of utilization and documented hours of service. There's not a set unit rate, and we don't have a way of specifically tying individual costs to a person being served. So it's just an estimation. But costs across the board increase, not surprisingly, given that the costs of everything have been going up. In state fiscal year 24, there was a significant increase in the choice rates to align with the rate increases in the Medicaid home and community-based services that were approved by CMS for the Division of Aging and Disabled and Traumatic Brain Injury waivers. Just as an example, the rate for attendant care increased over 47% per quarter hour, and home and community assistance increased over 60% per quarter hour. As I mentioned earlier, due to House Enrolled Act 1001 and the budget bill that was effective July 1 of 23, reducing that transfer to Medicaid, we were able to amend the grants early in state fiscal year 24 to award an additional $5 million to the AAAs to help offset some of the rate increases. This increase was not enough, though, to offset the costs. So we did see an increase in the waiting list of about 86% statewide, which we'll discuss on this slide that's up. So this is a breakdown of the waiting list by AAA at the end of the last 3 state fiscal years. There were 1,177 individuals on the waiting list at the end of state fiscal 23, and that increased to 2,184 at the end of 24. Most areas saw growth in their waiting lists, though a handful are still not reporting any waiting list. Each area maintains their own waiting list and follows their own internal processes for adding and removing individuals from the waiting list. So this could account for some of the variability.
Did you
I see.
notice which area doesn't have a waiting list?
I did.
Just saying.
They have consistently not. So
In fairness, I'm obviously kidding around, but I don't necessarily think it's bad to have a very small waiting list as long as it's resolved quickly, because sometimes I'm concerned that no waiting list could indicate that we're not reaching broadly enough or
Mhm.
deeply enough to make sure folks are aware of the availability of services. So certainly we want to keep the waiting lists as close to zero as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're getting the word out and reaching as many people as possible. But
And-
it's definitely concerning that the overall waiting list has increased by almost exactly 1,000.
And when individuals are added to the waiting list, which is managed through the CAMS care management system, there is a reason entered for the wait list. And all of them, aside from 2, were no funds available. And the 2 were no provider available. And they only have the option to put in one reason. So that might just be the primary reason, but
No funds or no provider.
those were the two
The two
reasons
reasons.
reported. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Representative, you make a very good point. Is there a sister company like Choice that you partner with to try to help get these folks off the waiting list?
So the AAA receive 2 different buckets of grant funds from us. They receive the state-funded Choice program, and also as part of their designation as an area agency on aging, receive a funding through the Federal Older Americans Act, which funds similar services, some more community-based services in some cases, like senior center support, transportation. So often those funds are kind of tried to leverage together to try to reach people as well. And also the options counselors at the area agencies, when they're working with an individual and assessing their needs, will try to leverage local resources in their community, whether it's partnering with a respite program at a local church or a transportation program. So there's a lot of, I think, creative thinking at the local level to try to leverage some resources there.
Thank you. One follow-up question. Can you send my LA a list of your primary services or all the services?
Mhm.
And then can you list the top 3 services or requested services through your agencies?
Yes.
And do you know off the top of your head, is transportation one of them?
So through Choice, it's not one of the top services that we
Not that you provide, but that's requested, is what I'm
that
asking.
requested.
By clients. Clients.
I would have to work with the AAAs to gather that information, but I've asked for it before and they can readily provide it, so I can work on that.
Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
So does CAMS require them to pick one of the 2, either lack of funding or lack of provider?
There's a drop down that has more options, but it's not an open text field. There's a set choices.
So what percentage of the wait list, do you know off the top of your head, was one of those two categories, lack of provider or lack of funding?
100%. Those were the only 2 things reported.
Even though there are other options on the draw? Okay. So what percentage was each of those categories?
99.7-ish, 8-ish, 9-ish% was no funds available.
Okay.
And only 2, like 2 out of the 2,000 some were no provider available. So it's probably 0.001.
Well, that's concerning about the lack of funds, particularly if it was, depending on how early it occurred in the fiscal year, right?
Mhm. I mean, I think the rate increase definitely impacted it. And then on the next slide, we'll go into a little more about kind of where we ended the year. But I do, before we get there, want to mention that we allocate the funds based on a funding formula that looks at average past spend and demographic information to try to have an established, equitable, explainable, fair share allocation of resources. It's kind of a guessing game and moving target, so we don't always get it right and often don't. So about early in the calendar year, so at the beginning of Q3, we looked at reallocating resources and reached out to the AAAs to see if anyone needed additional funding and if anyone was projecting having excess resources so that we would not, or try to minimize any reversion at year end. So 8 of the AAAs, so half, requested additional funding totaling about 1.9 million. 2 of the AAAs projected having excess funds. And that was area 7 and area 8, and that was actually totaling around 1.9 million as well. So we were able to shift around resources through grant amendments and provide all of the additional funding that was requested, which in past years, we have not been able to meet all of the requests, but this past year we were able to. So we were able to notify the AAAs of the amendments in March. And again, the purpose was to try to get the resources where there was the highest need, and also in hopes of making sure we were using the resources effectively and minimizing any reversion. So Rebecca, you can go to the next slide. This one's going to be hard to read, but
For the record, I've been reassured that Area 14 is getting the word out.
okay.
So, which I know they are, and I was trying to be light earlier. I'm proud of the work that Area 14 does with choice and so many other things, but I also recognize that there's a lot more we can do as a state through the AAAs to get the word out, and I'm looking forward to working with I4A and other stakeholders in the upcoming session to, as we've discussed in prior choice meetings, try to look at how we could be more creative and more intentional in using choice dollars to do more prevention, more quality of life. Prevention and quality of life activities. And I certainly didn't mean to suggest that a waiting list is a good thing. All I'm saying is knowing that all resources are limited. I just want to see all of the AAAs pushing the envelope as much as possible, and I think you all do as well. To where we don't have funds sitting around not doing anything, but we're pushing every available dollar out to help every possible Hoosier. And I appreciate what you and the division did to reallocate those monies that weren't being used at the time, to make sure that other AAAs had necessary resources. And obviously, it's a legislative conversation as to what the overall bucket is going to look like. We certainly don't want anyone on a waiting list if it can be avoided, and to the extent that we're really pushing the envelope, hopefully waiting lists can be minimized and very short in duration.
Agreed. So this is a summary of where we ended the year. So of the 8 AAAs that requested additional funding, 6 of them spent 100% of their award, or one spent nearly 100%. And as a reminder, this was their initial award that they received, the additional portion of the $5 million that we allocated out through an amendment in the fall, and then the additional resources through the allocations. 2 of the AAAs that contributed to the reversion had requested and received additional funds, but they ended up not spending the original amended amount that they had and not the additional funds that they received. And the reasons reported for that, one was related to an underutilization of care management, which presented challenges with then putting people on services to spend the funding. They had reported they were actively working to hire additional care management staff at a time when they were having a large number of staff resignations during the first half of this calendar year. And during that time, they also had to prioritize staff focusing on interactions with those transitioning to pathways, and then some of the service plan changes due to the Medicaid forecast reduction strategy. So it was primarily a staffing issue.
How is the Pathways program affecting your program, or is it?
Staffing has been a challenge. We have been working to try to effectively coordinate services and trying to make sure we have a seamless process when an individual is transitioning from choice to pathways. With the waiting list, individuals who have a choice service plan and need to transition to either pathways or the health and wellness waiver are given priority in waitlist invitations. So if there's an individual that transitions, they're in one of that priority group to move them to that program. We don't really have any data yet on whether there's been any impact in the number of people served or able to enroll in the program. We're only 3-4 months into the state fiscal year, but I expect that we'll be able to start, at least at a high level, seeing some trends in the coming months to see if there is anything that jumps out. And then Leslie, I guess if there's anything you want to add about that. No. Okay.
Thank you.
The other AAA that had requested additional funds and then didn't end up using it, reported it was kind of also a capacity issue. They had, in anticipation of running out of funds, made a lot of service plan cuts, and then just trying to ramp back up services. They didn't have adequate time to do so. And part of that, in addition to staff capacity issues, it was related to provider capacity. They just didn't have the ability within their area to quickly get services started and to meet the staffing needs. And then the largest contributor to the reversion was one of the 2 agencies that had allowed us to amend their contract down because they had anticipated not spending all of the funding. And then there was an additional $1.6 million that was not spent. And there are a number of reasons that were provided for that. Some of it had to do with former staff and CFO that kind of drove the spending discussions and took a very conservative approach, which led to some understanding. They also mentioned that cost share continues to be a barrier. Clients that may want services, but they don't want to commit to the cost share, so they end up declining services. So they've had to have people that have chosen not to enroll because of that. And it wasn't something that they could eat the costs of to, negate the cost share. So that was an issue that was brought up. We every year look at our funding formula and play around with numbers to see if there's a way that we can more effectively target the resources using some kind of formula. So we have so we're not just pick and choosing and actually having a formula. We have, yes.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Am I supposed to push this so you can hear me? Can you hear me?
No, I can
Okay.
hear, yeah.
Do you bump, so for those two, we go back to those two that didn't make it on this year. Do you allow them, if they reapply, do you allow them on in 2025 and bump somebody else so they are on and not they're not on the waiting list for 2 years in a row?
So the grant funds are awarded to the AAAs, and it's in the Indiana code that the funding is administered through them. The impact to the reversion, when we go to do the allocations for next year, we take into account historical spending. So the fact that they underspent will likely, I don't know how the numbers are exactly going to shake out, but it will be, their overall award will likely be impacted because of that.
Thank you.
Did that answer your?
Yes and no. I'm just on those individuals, will they have an opportunity to get on the waiting list over somebody else? I mean, get in the program over somebody else next year?
So the dollars that we're talking about are not individual people, and the waiting list is for an individual to access services. So it's the waiting list is for the individuals that are served through these 16 areas. So if somebody calls the AAA and says, I need help at home, they go through an assessment process, talk with them about options, what supports they might already have at home, whether it be an informal caregiver or something. And then they talk about options for publicly funded programs, whether it be the Medicaid waiver, Older Americans Act services, or choice. And depending on the individual's needs and situations, they end up on a different path. And choice is the funding of last resort. So other options are explored first before an individual's directed to choice. We have received claims for choice for the first quarter-ish, more or less. And looking at spending, most of them are kind of right where we would expect them to be. Some of them look to be overspending, indicating they might have an increased need. But we will start looking at potential reallocations after the first of the year. Okay, and last slide, next steps. Based on the conversation today, I will be making some of the modifications to the report that we talked about. I will work with Megan as the board chair for any review and approval of those updates. If there's any other comments that you would like to include in the report or areas to look at, we have time to do that as well. We need to get the report to our FSSA legislative office. It's usually around mid-December for submission to the General Assembly by the end of next month.
I do. I just recommend if the services are not too long to include in there, just to give them an idea of the wonderful things that you all do, to include that in your report.
The services are in there already.
Services,
Okay.
what I didn't put in there is a breakdown of spending by service
Yeah, I think
or,
Senator Jackson's suggestion is an excellent suggestion to give some context of which services are the most utilized and how the spending breaks down. So maybe
okay,
you could
that's a,
add that to the
Yes.
chart that you already have. If you don't mind, I'd like for you to circulate the revised report to the whole choice board.
okay, I can do that, yes.
You know, leave it up to us to weigh in or stay silent, but at least send it out since we have some substantive changes that have been discussed
Yep.
today. But again, your work has been outstanding. And it is
Thank you.
such a valuable report. I hope a lot of folks pay attention to it as we move into the legislative session, because again, it's going to be choice is inevitably going to be a topic of conversation, even more so than it typically is in a budget session. Procedurally, I know in the past, the voting members of the board, when we've had a quorum, have authorized the chair to sign off on the final report. Procedurally, since we don't have a quorum, do we need to have a special meeting, maybe by Zoom or something, to provide that authorization, even if it's a 10-minute meeting the second week of December or something? I just.
There's nothing in statute that would require that vote.
Okay.
So I think we're okay if we just have a conversation otherwise, but
You can just check with circulate.
I'll
it.
circulate and
Yeah.
check. Yes.
Give everybody a reasonable amount of time to weigh in with any concerns or questions, and then the chair can say, we're good to go.
Okay. Yes. Unless you think different.
That sounds fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm all for doing it the easiest way possible. I don't have the statute in front of me, and I wanted to
Yes.
make sure we were on firm footing. Because again, it is, I'm just underscoring again how important this report is, and I don't want anyone to be able to say that it wasn't properly produced or provided.
Yeah, the only thing in statute specifically relates to any changes to the administrative code.
Well, the report isn't proposing any changes to the administrative code.
No, I know, but I'm saying as far as a vote of the
Oh,
board and
yeah.
input, that's like really the only area that's specifically outlined as
In statute,
in statute.
Right.
Yes.
in terms of rulemaking
Yes.
authority. Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
perfect.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation and
Thank you
questions.
for your report. Very well done.
Yes, thank you so much, Aaron, for the report. It was very informative. Very interested to see what we do next with that. Okay, should we move on to our FSSA update?
Yes, we can do that. Hi, Leslie Huckleberry, Director of the Division of Aging. I'll update on just a handful of things today. I know we've, just got a few minutes left here, and with the snow, folks probably want to get on the road if they need to, but wanted to provide first an update on the wait list for the Pathways and Health and Wellness waivers. I don't know if Rebecca can share the slide. If she has that up.
One moment, I'm getting it.
Thank you, ma'am. So while she's putting that together, this slide is just an illustration of the information that is now on the webpage for the waiting list dashboard. So everything you see on this slide, once she has it up there, thank you, Rebecca. Everything you see here is on the webpage where we keep all of our waitlist information. We have updated that webpage in the last week or two to include more information and notably to also include some additional frequently asked questions that drill down into a lot of the common things we get asked, a lot of the things the AAAs get asked, to really try and provide more detail and more clarity for folks. So this breakdown is an update on both the pathways and the health and wellness waivers, showing the number of invitations that have gone out. So a couple things I want to note. Invitations for November for pathways was an increase. So we have continued to increase the number of overall invitations month to month as we looked at capacity of the processes and just monitored output of the invitation process. So we did invite 1,500 people onto the pathways waiver in November. Health and wellness, we invited 500. We did increase health and wellness in October. We kept that steady for November. And then you'll see on there the total number of individuals we've invited off in this waiver year that started July 1st. The number of individuals on the waiting list for each waiver as of November 18th or November 13th respectively. The other item you're going to note here that is new information is the last original level of care date invited for the month. So we've added this information both to the dashboard and to the letters that will be going out to individuals when they get added to the wait list. They will have their level of care date on that letter. This is to provide a bit more information for folks on where things are with the invitation process based on folks that are not in one of the other priority categories for the waiver. So as a reminder, we have within both the Pathways and Health and Wellness waiver, we have priority categories, which are individuals who, if they're in that category, they get bumped to the top of the wait list and get a fairly immediate invite in the following month, depending on the number of priority individuals on the wait list at the time. That those priority categories are individuals transitioning from nursing facilities, individuals transitioning from choice, and individuals with an inpatient stay. So those are priority category individuals, and then anyone else on the waiver is invited based on that original level of care date. So again, we've added that date just so folks have a bit more insight into where we are in that process and within that date range. So as they see their level of care date, they see the date we've last invited, they can kind of get a sense of where they stand on that list. You know, we felt like this offers more transparency without offering too much confusion, because it is hard to tell someone exactly where they are in the list because of those priority categories day to day. So that is new information on there. And then we do also have the total number of approved slots for that waiver year. So again, all of this is on that webpage. We will send out a link to that webpage to the board after this meeting, so you all have it. I think we've sent it before, but I'm just going to keep sending it so folks have it top of mind, because we are continuing to add information to this webpage as we're able to identify more consistent data as we go and more information. And so you will continue to see updates to that webpage. So just really recommend people, anybody who wants to stay apprised to what's going on with the waitlist, continue to visit that webpage and look at that information. Does anybody have any questions on this data or information? Yes, sir.
Yesterday was the Medicaid Advisory Committee, and of course, this came up.
Yes.
Medicaid Director Steinmetz presented this information, and I appreciate the movement, toward more information and transparency. I think the one piece I asked her about, and I'll raise it here for the benefit of folks who weren't in the Medicaid Advisory Committee yesterday, is tracking outcomes for people on the waiting list, the two waiting lists, who ultimately do not receive a waiver. So I think it's very important that we understand what happened to those individuals if they receive an invitation, to use the term that we've been using, and for whatever reason they no longer qualify for a waiver or no longer need a waiver. I think we need to understand why. Did someone who was waiting for HCBS services go into skilled nursing, perhaps because the HCBS services weren't available? Did that individual die? What circumstance caused them to no longer need a waiver? So I know Director Steinmetz said that that was something that you all are working on. I don't know if you want to just echo that or comment any further, but I think it's really important information, again, from an accountability standpoint, if nothing else, because we have folks on the waiting lists who are in need of services and aren't receiving those services. And I think we owe it to them and to the public to be accountable for what happened to those individuals.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I would agree with Director Steinmetz's comments yesterday. We are actively working on reviewing that information and drilling down into it. It is complex for a variety of reasons. You have to pull from different systems, and there are a variety of circumstances that we're seeing already. And so we are trying to really drill down and to get into those details and have reliable, robust data on that information. So for a couple of reasons, right? As to your point, it's accountability and transparency. It also helps inform our processes. So if we're seeing particular trends, are we adding people to the wait list in the right way? Are we processing this the way that we should be? So it is something, it's a shared goal to really be able to drill down into that and get clarity on the variety of experiences that we're seeing for those folks, for sure.
Thank you. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that every time someone no longer needs a waiver, it's a bad outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, there may have been a change in family circumstances in terms of availability of caregivers or other circumstances. The person could have had a change, a positive change in terms of health status or whatever. I mean, that's obviously not the typical reason for no longer needing a waiver. That they could have moved out of state.
Mhm.
I mean, in my area, there's probably somebody who's been on the waiting list for Pathways, for example, who has moved to Kentucky because they're moving in with an adult child or something, for example, again, looking at the caregiver circumstances. Now, I think that is the rare exception compared to the undesirable outcomes that cause someone to no longer need a waiver. But certainly, and you mentioned administrative, I mean, there are administrative reasons. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing to keep in mind too is today with our process, you don't have to meet full eligibility on the functional or financial side to be added to the wait list. So that's something we're seeing too, is that there are folks that were added that ultimately don't meet either functional or financial criteria to make it onto the waiver too. So again, that's the kind of thing we're really trying to, now that we've got a couple of months of experience, to kind of drill into and get a better understanding. So we're hopeful we'll have more on that soon.
And just to close the loop, again, for the benefit of folks who weren't in the Medicaid Advisory Committee meeting, we also talked about the use of ARPA funds for assisted living for folks who had been approved prior to the April notification letter, but then ended up on the waiting list. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Director Steinmetz said that was in process, and you all had identified about $5 to $10 million of ARPA funds that could be available for that purpose. So I'm glad you found a way to meet at least some of those needs. I don't think she necessarily spoke to, and I don't think I asked about whether that meets all of the needs for that population. Maybe you can speak to that.
Sure.
It's a finite population, obviously.
It is. So we did expand the eligibility just a little bit for that assisted living population. So you had to be residing in an assisted living facility on or before June 30th, because we recognized and received feedback that there were folks that really were in process and maybe thought, hey, this wait list isn't going to last very long, so we'll go ahead and move in. So recognizing that and kind of looking at the numbers and the budget that we did have available, we did expand that just a little bit. So we've done what we could with the resources we have to meet as much need as we could. Certainly there, of course, are going to be folks that ultimately don't meet eligibility criteria. And so we're continuing to work with individuals and facilities and stakeholders as much as we can. But I think we felt like we did capture a good amount of those folks that got caught up in that kind of that unknown space when we started the wait list.
I appreciate you mentioning the June 30th expansion. That didn't come up in the MAC yesterday. And I think that is important and probably welcome information for a lot of the folks who are listening in on this meeting. So thank you. And thanks for the division's efforts in trying to meet the needs of that population.
Thank you. Any other questions from folks on the wait list? Thanks, Rebecca, for sharing that slide. Just a couple other updates I'll share quickly. So wanted to share a quick update on adult protective services. So We have put an RFP, a request for proposals, out for the Adult Protective Services Program. That RFP is still out there, so I can't share a whole lot of information other than we have put it out for bid. Bids are due December 9th. We did have a Q&A process as you have with RFPs, and that is posted on IDOA's website as well. After bids are in on December 9th, we will move into our evaluation process and make an award on that RFP sometime after the first of the year. So that is continuing to move forward on the timeline that we had projected out for that work. Relatedly, we are also getting ready to post our vacant full-time APS director position. So it's been a bit since we've had that as an actual full-time position within the Division of Aging, but recognizing with the transition and really with the importance of that program, we wanted to make sure it had a full-time director position. So that will get posted here soon, and we'll have a bit more state level staffing support to oversee that program. And then the final update I'll give is multi-sector plan on aging. So that is the 10-year strategic plan. We've been working with a variety of partners and stakeholders around the state to develop for Indiana to think about how we best prepare the state for the rapidly growing aging population over the next 10 years. We had lots of work group and stakeholder and steering committee meetings over the last several months. We are working to finalize the plan and hopefully get approval for that, and then be able to start sharing out really the first, I'll say the first phase of that 10-year plan and start working toward implementation. So we will, if we have more details we can share in the January meeting, then we, with the chair's permission, we'll bring it there. But we'll continue to keep the board updated on that work as well. And that is all I have, unless folks have questions for me about any other division or agency initiatives.
I have 3 housekeeping items if we're close to the end of the agenda and don't have any other business. I don't see the chair. I don't see anybody except Ms. McLaren online. Did we lose the feed? Hopefully not.
No, I think it's just.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead with any questions you have.
Thank you. I was just seeing a black screen with one name on it, so I was afraid we lost folks. So number one, can we get today's slides, the slide decks from today?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy can send those out to the choice board members. Second, the status of appointments, because once again, we don't have a quorum. And I know there have been nominations or suggestions, I should say. So can you speak to that?
Erin, can you? Yeah.
So the applications for 2 of the vacant positions are pending with the governor's office. It is my understanding that there will not be any more appointments made before the transition in January. So we are still looking for applications we have 2 vacancies for citizens nominated by 2 or more organizations that represent older adults and have statewide membership. One of them must be a choice program participant or a caregiver of someone who receives choice funds. We have a vacancy for 1 licensed physician, physician assistant, or nurse who specializes either in the field of gerontology or field of disabilities, and then 1 home care services advocate. And I can send these out
Disability.
pending.
Was that on your list?
Hmm?
Was that on the list you just read? I didn't hear it.
We don't even have applicants for the positions that I just read.
Oh.
We have an applicant
Gotcha.
for the disability position pending, as
Okay.
well as a choice provider is still pending with the governor's
Gotcha. Okay,
office.
because I know the ARC has submitted a name.
Yes,
So
yeah,
you have
That's-
that, right? Okay.
long been,
Yeah, I think we
forwarded.
discussed it back in September.
if not before, yes,
Or-
yes. So
Okay, well,
it's out of our hands.
it may be a while before we approve minutes.
Maybe January, I'll be optimistic.
I'll be optimistic too. January is going to be very busy. Madam Chair, my final item, if I may, I'd like to make an introduction.
Yes.
So I just mentioned the ARC, and we have tried to make the disability part of the choice program more of a focus in recent years. And the ARC of Indiana has been very active with the choice board and has, as I just mentioned, suggested someone to serve on this board. And the person I'm about to introduce, I don't believe is that person, but I want to ask him to come forward. Mr. Krishan, would you please step up to the microphone? So this is Tom Krishan, the new Chief Legal Officer for the ARC of Indiana, whom I've had the privilege to work with for a number of years in his previous role with Indiana Disability Rights. And he has joined the ARC, and I want to thank you for being here today for this meeting and representing the ARC here, and invite you to introduce yourself and share anything you'd like to share about the ARC's involvement in the choice board.
Sure, I'll be brief. I think you handled the introduction very well. Tom Krishan, I'm the new Chief Legal Officer for the ARC of Indiana. Previously spent 14 years with Indiana Disability Rights. So I've got a bit of a background in at least the space and some of the services. As Representative Clear mentioned, there is a application on behalf of the ARC of Indiana is pending for the board. So we certainly would like to see that go through and be as helpful as we can on future board meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Wonderful. Thank you. Do we have any other business to discuss?
I just want to formally introduce myself.
Please.
Hi, I'm State Senator Lakeisha Jackson. I just want to introduce myself. I wasn't able to attend some of the prior meetings, but if I'm on this committee body moving forward, commission moving forward, I will plan to be here and be responsive and engaged. I'm very passionate about serving our seniors and advocating for them. Actually got a bill coming out for them. It's already ready to file. And so thank you all for the work that you do. I highly respect you in the work that you do. And I just wanted to say that and thank you. I'm honored to be here with you today. And you too, Representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, and it looks like our next meeting is January 16th. So with a motion, should we go ahead and adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.